Good morning, everyone. Today we talk about exam preparation. Now first, let's look at the general things for your physical science preparation. The first thing you have to know is that it's you and only you that need to study. You can have a perfect teacher, you can have a wonderful study buddy, you can have very good junior Tukkie videos to watch, but if you don't go and sit down and concentrate and focus and work, then it's not going to be successful. Now, next up, you need to think, what are you going to learn? Now, the whole year, you've had your textbook, you've had your teacher, and make sure that it's a CUPS textbook that's going to give you exactly the right information. If you want another textbook just to say things a little bit differently, then you can access the free Siyavula textbook, and there's also a teacher guide. Just go to siyavula.com and there you will find free textbooks that you can either download or just read on the internet, and that will give you another perspective and also some different questions with the answers in the teacher's guide. The next thing that you need is the exam guidelines. That's going to tell you exactly what you need to learn. Now this year with COVID-19, it's a little bit difficult because every school can decide if they're going to write the departmental paper or they're going to write their own paper. So you have to check with your teacher and the exam guidelines and then make sure that you know exactly what is in the paper that you are going to write. A very good way to prepare for the exam is to do old exam papers. And there you can get the old exam papers from the Department of Education's website. Then you need to decide when you're going to study. Guys, this must be very specific. You need to put down the date, the time, the subject, and the topic. Don't just write physical science. You have to write, I'm going to look at Newton's laws from 2 to 3 on that day. And be very realistic. Don't put half an hour if you know it's actually 8 hours of work. Be realistic. Think about what you're learning. And when you make your schedule, you have to be careful. You need to add rest and social time. If you just put down the work, you will feel cheated and you will not focus when you are supposed to work. So put the rest and the social time in there so that you know what is coming after the study session. Then you need to know that you have to write. Don't just go and read the work in your textbook or the previous questions that you work through. You need a pencil in your hand. You need to be writing. You have to be doing questions. Don't just look at the question. Cover the question, do the whole answer, then go back and see if you've got it right. Another thing that you have to remember is you must work without your cell phone. No cell phone while you're working. But you have to stay in touch as well. So the moment that you get to that rest and social time on your schedule, you go and you talk to your friends and you make sure you stay in touch. But when you're sitting down to study, that cell phone must be switched off and out of sight so that you can really focus on what you're doing. Something that I find very helpful is a reminder list. If you put a piece of paper next to you and you remember something that you have to do, it is good to write it down because then you'll stop worrying that you'll forget about it. You will know you have to feed the dog or phone your grandma or whatever. Write it down and then you can just forget about it and focus on your studies. The other thing is to stick to your schedule. If you start cheating on your schedule, you can throw the schedule away because then you'll keep cheating and you'll cheat more and more and it will be no use having a schedule at all. So stick to the schedule, and that's why it's very important that when you write down the time and date and topic, that you must be realistic. Then when you sit down to study, remember to test your memory and to test your understanding. Don't just input. You must be testing yourself, working through old exam papers so that you get a chance to apply what you've learned. In the exam guideline, you will see that there's different cognitive levels. That's the level of how difficult things are. That's a level that indicates how difficult things are. Now, the first cognitive level is remembering, recall, and that's where you find things like the definitions. So really, guys, you can't afford to have 15% missing or some of that 15% missing if that is the easy 50%. So make sure that you memorize all the definitions and don't just learn them. Check yourself, write it down to see if you've got it correct. If you are learning a definition, underline or highlight the parts that you forget so that you will remember them the next time. Then you get understanding and then application. Definitely you will need to do a lot of old questions so that you can practice applying what you've learned. And then we get to the cognitive level 4, evaluating. And that's often when they change something and they ask you what's going to happen to some other variable. Say, for instance, they're removing a resistor and then they ask you what's going to happen to an ammeter or a voltmeter reading. Now in physics, you have to look at mechanics. Now that's all about the vectors and then also about Newton's laws. Now remember with Newton's laws, if something is at rest or moving at constant velocity, then you're working with Newton's first law, and we're going to approach that question by starting out with F net being 0. And when there's an acceleration, you will know that is Newton's second law. And then you start the question with F net is equal to m times a. Then we move on to waves, sound and light. And there you've got refraction and Snell's law and also diffraction. The refraction and diffraction we are only going to do in grade 11. But Newton's laws and also the electricity and magnetism is required for matric as well. Now in electricity, we look at electrostatics. There we have to look at Coulomb's law and also at electric fields. Then with electromagnetism, that's all about Faraday's law and induction. And then we have electric circuits. With electric circuits, you have to check with your teacher. The grade 11 CAPS does not include internal resistance. But some teachers prefer to do internal resistance in grade 11 because in grade 12, the time is very limited. So check with your teacher if your exam paper is going to include internal resistance or not, if you are writing a school paper. In the exam guidelines, you will see how they expect you to answer the questions. For every calculation, you need an equation, and that you have to get from the information sheet. Then you have to have the substitution of the correct values, and then you have an answer, and that should have the correct unit and 2 places after the comma. Now say for instance they're asking you for power and you are using the equation P equals W over delta T. If you substitute and then you can rearrange, if you're actually looking for delta T, you can manipulate to get the delta T in front. What happens if you substitute correctly, but you work that out incorrectly? Then you'll just lose the mark for the last answer. Some of you like to rewrite your equation to have that delta T that you need as your answer in front. But if you rewrite that incorrectly, you will get nothing for the equation and nothing for the rest of the question. So then you'll end up with 0 out of 3. So rather write down the equation from the information sheet in the original way and then substitute the correct values and then manipulate. Don't manipulate before adding the values to the equation. And don't leave out the equation. If you leave out the equation, then you are not going to have the mark for that equation. If you don't know what to do, don't just write down the equation. Equation on its own is not worth marks. You need to substitute. If you've substituted the correct values, you will get a mark from that. If you substituted the values in the wrong positions, then you will not get a mark, but at least you'll get that mark for the equation. But guys, don't just go and substitute in anything. You can't just put in random numbers. At least the numbers must be something from the question. Then you'll get a mark for that equation. But if it's just any random numbers that you put in there, they won't give you any of the marks. So guys, focus on the physics and remember what you are doing now is going to determine if you will be accepted at university for the course that you want to do.